Good afternoon. Hello from Chicago. I'm just very happy to be here to present today. I'm a professor at DePaul University in Chicago. We're the largest Catholic university in the United States, and I direct an urban planning center at DePaul called the Chaddick Institute, which you'll hear about. In my younger days, I spent 8 years at United Airlines, so I've been to Korea a couple times, but it's been a long time. I really hope I can get back sometime soon. We're very happy. We have nonstop flights from Chicago O'Hare to Korea a couple times a year. I'm going to describe two projects I'm involved with here in Chicago, and I'm going to go kind of quick just to show you some of the things we're doing. My center at DePaul, one second here, I'm having a little trouble advancing the slide. One second. My center at DePaul, we're called the Chaddick Institute. We're right downtown Chicago, and we're very pleased to be the home right next door to our elevated transit system, which is right outside our front door. Chicago's, of course, facing COVID right now, but it's a pretty exciting time for our city where there's a lot of good things happening, but a lot of things that are very worrisome at the same time. So hope we can have you in Chicago sometime for an event. I also want to mention that everybody's invited to the Transportation Research Forum, and we're excited to have the event coming up in April. It's going to be online, and it's going to be the first time we're doing a virtual format, but it's in April. And we usually get really good attendance from Asia and Korea, so we hope you can take part in it as well. It's going to be a pretty good event. And what I want to talk to you today about is some research I've been doing for about the last 3 years. And I'll tell you about this project, and then after this, I'll tell you about 10 minutes about some work we're doing about Amazon Airlines. And but this first project is about how technology is really helping us rethink how public transit works. And this first study we did was called Partners in Transit, and it was about how Uber and Lyft and other companies that do ride sharing are working with public transit companies to improve the way they deliver services. And I want to give you a little graphic we made of kind of how these programs work. And here's a slide of an individual. And the way these programs often work is somebody leaves their house, they walk to a designated pickup spot. That's part of the program. They then engage their app, and with the app, they request a vehicle. It may be Uber or Lyft, and the Uber Lyft picks them up from the designated spot and takes them to a certain point that drops them off then at a transit stop. And the transit stop, then the bus comes, the train comes, and takes them to the final destination. But the neat thing about these programs is they're all designed to be done on one app. So you can access the app and increasingly pay both fares with one click. And I can tell you, somebody that uses transit every day, the number of times that I get lazy and take an Uber because the bus doesn't come. These programs are designed to kind of integrate the two together, which is pretty exciting. Two examples of smaller cities that are doing this, and I'll describe our research a little bit. But Tacoma, Washington, you can see here there's a Lyft banner on the bus stop. And so people would take the Lyft to the bus stop and connect to the bus, and we'll see they get, in their cases, $5 off the Lyft fare. And Dayton, Ohio actually cut some bus routes, so they allow people to use Lyft for free if they come to the nearest bus stop to their house. And so an idea of how these work, what we did was we looked around the country at about 15 partnerships that were really exciting. And we talked to the leaders, we looked at the data, we talked to Uber, Lyft, and others about how they're working, and we tried to then understand how these systems could really expand after COVID, the COVID change is coming up. So, things are very scary in the United States right now, with transit use being only about 30 to 40% of the normal because of COVID. And so transit agencies know they have to think very creatively to build confidence in using the system. So to give you an idea here is 4 programs that are now being used, and St. Petersburg, Florida has a real simple program. They cut back a fixed route bus system, and they give you a $5 discount if you take Uber or Lyft to a spot in which the bus service was cut, or they let you take the trip for $5, and the public agency pays the rest. In Boston, if you're a senior or paratransit user, which means you essentially are over 65 or somebody with handicap mobility problems, they pay up to $40 of your trip. And the idea there is to encourage people not to use the more expensive government provided service, but to use Uber and Lyft and put less pressure on the government system, which it costs about $60 a ride to provide. Detroit, they do it for people working at night. You can get $7 off per trip. If you go to a bus stop where there's little area where there's little bus service and you connect to a bus, you get $7 off. And Tacoma, they'll pay for the full cost of the trip in certain areas. So these programs are taking off really in the last 2 years. And a couple of the key features one is the programs are called co-branded, where you put both the name of the transit agency and the name of the rideshare company right on the vehicle. So here's a VIA service with Newton, Massachusetts. Here's another service that's co-branded. And you try to create in the mind of the customer the sense that they are the same. Another big issue with these is there's a big trade-off between how much you want to spend as a government and how much quality you want to provide. And this is kind of an interesting thing, that if you build a program with Lyft, the way it often works is you just use the regular Lyft vehicles out there, and you develop the system where they connect to transit or they go where transit's been cut. And you don't have co-branding, as you see here at the bottom. You don't have special customer service. You just let people use the existing Lyft fleet that's out there. Other services, we have a company called VIA, which is sort of like Lyft, but they do more custom programs where they may charge you for every hour a vehicle is in service, where you contract with them to run these vehicles. And there you can brand the fleet, you can have better end customer service. So if you just want to go inexpensively, people use Uber and Lyft. They want to use something a little more custom, they often go to VIA. And so anyway, the interesting thing about this, where technology is just so fascinating, is most of these programs establish real clear boundaries of where the customer can travel to get the discount or the free trip. So here's a good example in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they build a light rail line, and they want more people to use the light rail line, but they have not much parking. So they allow discounted trips from the area in the red all the way to the Link light rail line if you make the connection. And it's helped drive people to public transit, use public transit more without giving people rides that they might otherwise pay for going to social visits or entertainment things. We don't have any of these programs in Chicago, so we're using our study to try to push our mayor and our transportation department to really think about these things. So we're such a great transportation center, we think Chicago needs these programs. And right now, the government has a pretty negative view of Uber and Lyft. We're trying to get them to work together with transit to come up with creative solutions, and the pandemic might do it. So I'm going to go through these last slides real quick, but just some things that we can expect for these partnerships. And the first point is really there's more integration, that they're trying to make vehicles that have the paint scheme of the transit company, that have the branding on it. So the public transit company is on the rideshare vehicle, to create names that So people think they're actually on public transit when they're using one of these booking platforms. And it's hard to break that psychology because people think of Uber and Lyft and transit as two different systems. And one way they're doing this is with payment integration, where one click, you can pay for both the rideshare trip and the transit trip, with one click of your smartphone. And like the system here we see in Seattle, they actually take your transit card. You can get in an Uber and Lyft in the program and use your transit card to pay, which is a really exciting thing. We're going to see more of these in suburban or rural communities, way out at the edge of town where they can't support bus service and have to make cuts. We're also going to see more data come online, which is something we haven't had much. So our study really tried to push for that, ways to study how people are using these. And the second last one is, in the United States, we're having such an aging population in certain parts of the country, especially in the east and the Midwest. And we know that more of these services for seniors are going to be used because it's so expensive to provide the government-provided services like this trip here in Boston, that every trip on the ride cost them $52 to carry somebody, whereas if they use a TNC, a rideshare company, a transportation network company, which is the term they use for rideshare companies here, it's only about $9 or $10. So they cut the cost by a factor of 5. And that's, can help stretch the services more places. And finally, these programs, I'm curious how much of this you're seeing in Asia and the Pacific Rim and Korea, but in Europe, it's really taking off now. And there's a massive program in Berlin where there's actually 150 vehicles that have been branded that use Via, which is a private rideshare company that integrates with transit in a really interesting and exciting way. So that's something we're going to see a lot of coming online here. I'm going to see for a second if I can get my picture back here so I can see everybody. There we go. But I'm going to hold questions to the end if that's all right, and tell you about this other project we're doing that's in the area of freight, and it's fun to do because Amazon is a very secretive company when it comes to its airlines. They buy planes. They don't tell us how they're using them. We know it's very important to their parcel delivery, but they're very secretive about their data. So we have started to track really closely what Amazon Air is doing. So I'm going to shift and tell you about this project, which has got a lot of attention in the media, which has been kind of fun. Essentially, we have 3 big providers of package delivery in the United States: Federal Express, United Parcel Service, and the U.S. Postal Service. All do door-to-door delivery of parcels or business-to-consumer delivery of parcels. And then we have other players too, of course, which people I'm sure in the audience here know about. DHL does a lot of international shipments. There's a lot of regional players. But only FedEx and UPS and the Postal Service offer essentially overnight delivery to anywhere you want to ship. So Amazon, growing so fast, has created an airline that's entirely 2 kinds of planes: 767s, the mid-size, middle-of-the-market plane, and smaller 737s like you see here in the bottom right. They started out very small about 2 years ago, and while we're watching their fleet, we saw since 2016, it started 4 years ago, but really they were small until 2 years ago. We've been tracking their fleet, and they went from 4 planes all the way up to 43 in late August 2020, and now today they're already up to 57. So they've added 16 or so planes, added up to 57 planes. Now they have contracts with a lot of other airlines too. So it's hard to measure their fleet, but the planes that they actually lease themselves and officially registered to Amazon is now up to about 57. And what they do is they hire contractors to run the planes. So they're not their employees for the most part, and they use 4 or 5 contractors to run the airline. And to give you a sense of how big they are, we project next year they're going to be up to about 70 planes. And that's pretty safe because I said they're already up to 57. We think in 6 or 7 years, Amazon Air will have 200. And that's what got all the headlines from our study. People call and say, how do you know that? And so forth. Well, what we did was we tried to look at the role this airline's playing. And we'll see here that'll put them in a pretty up there, second only to FedEx and UPS, which too have very complicated fleet arrangements where they lease a lot of planes and contract in ways that aren't shown here. But what we did was we looked at the tail numbers of Amazon planes and we tracked where they fly. And this is the US map. And this was the flights in August 24th, 2020. And one thing we noticed here is the very decentralized airline that doesn't use a centralized hub like FedEx does in Memphis or UPS does at Louisville, and then with smaller hubs. They tend to run flights often during the daytime. And we have flights here. I think the blue flights are day and the reds at night. And they tend to link their major warehouse locations. And they're building a hub we'll see in Cincinnati, and they also have smaller hubs in Rockford, in Ontario, and in Fort Worth. But we've found that they're mainly using the airline right now for rapid movement of delivery between their warehouses. And if you look at this next slide, you can see here is the Amazon Air fleet with some other contractors in Cincinnati. And when we get to a slide, internationally, they're still really small. And you'll notice here they did some flights in Shanghai and Osaka. We haven't seen any Korea flights, but we haven't looked in the last few months. Some service to Hawaii, a couple European flights. But what I wanted to point out is that we plotted their warehouses and looked at the locations of their airports. And what we found, looking at this, is one, that when Amazon clusters warehouses, they really cluster them together for the synergy of having inventory being somewhat centralized. And we notice the airports are very closely aligned to where the major warehouses are. And many of the flights leave in late afternoon, which suggests to us that what they're doing is positioning goods where it's simply impossible for Amazon to stock every good in every size and every color in all the locations around the U.S. to allow for next day delivery or even 2-day delivery by truck. And so they need to have a method to get goods to the warehouses so they can ship those goods for overnight or 2-day delivery by truck once that order is placed. And so looking at the system here, we found that the network is built heavily around linking warehouses, not so much linking warehouses to population. It's really, we think, designed to make the inventory system much more efficient. But the scale of the growth to do this with the millions of products that they stock makes this a really complex proposition. And so in doing this analysis, one thing we're watching real closely is last month, they actually started an internal Europe operation. So they leased 2 planes to an Irish company, a couple more are coming, and they're flying within Europe. So we think they're building a similar system to operate within Europe, and they're mostly going to rely on traditional cargo carriers to get goods across the Pacific from China and Korea and from Philippines and so forth to the warehouses. And they're going to specialize in getting those goods to where they need to go once they're in the warehouse system. But the other thing I want to point out, which is the big story, and I grew up in Cincinnati, so this is something that's getting a lot of attention there, is in 2021, they're opening a big hub in Cincinnati, right next door to DHL's main international hub for the United States. And this is a gigantic warehouse. And if you look at the map of Cincinnati, which is right here, you can see Cincinnati has been like a one-day truck drive of an enormous population around the United States. And so this hub in Cincinnati, our sense is it's not going to be a FedEx-style hub where planes fly in, goods are changed, transshipped to other planes. We think it's going to be kind of a truck-fed focal point in which goods get to Cincinnati, they can be trucked to hundreds of warehouses within the next day. But we're not sure how big this hub's going to be. It's going to have room for 150 planes to be parked. But we think it's many years before it gets to that size. We don't think they're going to enter the market and become just like FedEx and UPS, in which they will carry third-party goods not connected to Amazon, where you could go to an Amazon store and ship a parcel just like you would at FedEx. We think this is going to initially be only for Amazon products, but just last month, one of the big investment houses said they think Amazon is serious about becoming an international third-party logistics provider. And so we're looking for evidence how that's going to play out in Cincinnati when this hub opens next year, to see how that transpires. And here's one of the planes there. So with that, thank you for letting me present to you guys. I'm a late bird. I stay up till midnight anyway, so this is kind of fun to be on with you guys. And we hope we can have you in Chicago sometime. And I'm happy to take some questions now, too, if there are any from the audience. So thank you.